"You're not my daughter anymore," her uncle said, not even looking up from the papers on his desk. "You're an arrangement." Mabel Crosse was 26 years old when those words were spoken to her, and she would remember them for the rest of her life, not because they broke her, but because they were the last honest thing Gordon Crosse ever said. It had started, as most disasters do, quietly. Mabel's parents had died in a car accident on the highway outside of Sudbury when she was 19. A winter storm, black ice, a transport truck that couldn't stop in time. After the funeral, her Uncle Gordon had taken her in, with the kind of generosity that came with conditions attached, the kind that is mentioned at every dinner table so no one forgets the debt. He had paid for her last 2 years of college. He had given her a room in his house, and when his lumber business started bleeding money, in the 3rd year she lived there, he began looking at her the way men like him look at things they own. Raymond Aldcroft was 51 years old, owned 400 acres of wheat land outside of Timmins, and had not spoken to a woman he didn't employ in going on 6 years. His wife, Patricia, had died of cancer in the early winter of 2017, and the grief had settled into him like frost settles into soil, deep, permanent, changing the texture of everything. He was not a cold man. He was simply a man who had learned that warmth costs something. Gordon Crosse had done business with Raymond's grain supplier, which was how Gordon had come to know Raymond's name, Raymond's land, and Raymond's general situation. Gordon was the kind of man who filed away other people's vulnerabilities the way others file receipts. He needs someone to manage the house. Gordon told Mabel one Sunday afternoon in October, the leaves outside already gone brown and curling at the edges. "A housekeeper, he's offering good pay." Mabel looked at him across the kitchen table. She had learned to read Gordon's face over 7 years of living under his roof, and she did not like what she was reading now. "I have a job," she said. She was working at a legal firm in town, filing documents, answering phones, learning things she hoped would amount to something. "You have a part-time job," Gordon said. "This would be full-time. Live in. I don't want to live in Timmins." Gordon folded his hands on the table. "Mabel, Raymond Aldcroft is a man of means. He's agreed to take on a portion of what I owe the bank in exchange for me." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Mabel had ever heard. "You make it sound ugly," Gordon said. "How would you like me to make it sound?" He didn't answer that. He pushed an envelope across the table. Raymond's name on the return address, Gordon's name on the front, and inside, she would later learn, the terms of an agreement that had been written and signed before she was ever consulted. She sat with it for 3 days. She called her friend Patrice in Ottawa, who said, "Get out of there, and don't you dare go, and I have a couch." She sat in her room and looked at the ceiling and thought about what her mother would have said. Her mother had been a practical woman, a kind one. She had always told Mabel, "You can't pour from an empty cup, but you can't fill it by burning the house down either." On the 4th day she packed a bag, not because she agreed, not because she forgave Gordon, but because staying felt like slow erosion, and leaving, even leaving like this, felt like choosing something, even if she wasn't sure what. Raymond Aldcroft was waiting in the driveway when Gordon's car turned in off the county road. He was standing beside a gray pickup truck with mud along the running boards, his arms at his sides, wearing a barn jacket that had seen better decades. He was taller than she'd expected, quieter looking. He watched the car come up the gravel lane without any visible eagerness, which she found, oddly, to be the most reassuring thing about him. Gordon got out and shook Raymond's hand and said something about the weather. Raymond nodded. He glanced once toward Mabel, who had gotten out of the passenger side and was standing by the trunk, and he said, "I'll get that," meaning her bag, and came around and lifted it himself before she could object. Gordon talked for another few minutes. Raymond said almost nothing. Then Gordon got back in his car, and the car went down the gravel lane. And then it was just Mabel and Raymond Aldcroft standing in front of a white farmhouse with green shutters and a front porch that needed new boards. You don't have to be here, Raymond said. He was looking at the house, not at her. I know, she said. He stopped. Seemed to recalibrate. I didn't ask for this arrangement any more than you did. Gordon Crosse is a man who makes arrangements. I needed some debt cleared and he offered. Another stop. I'm not in the habit of explaining myself, but I thought you should know that. Mabel studied him for a moment. The afternoon light was flat and gray, the way October light in northern Ontario tends to be, and Raymond Aldcroft's face in that light was weathered and serious and gave away very little. All right, she said. The house needs work, he said. Cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing. I'm up at 5. I won't bother you evenings. You have the whole east wing to yourself. He picked up her bag. Come on, I'll show you. The kitchen was large and clean and smelled like coffee and wood smoke. The east wing turned out to be a bedroom, a sitting room, and a small bathroom. More space than she'd had in Gordon's house. The bed had a quilt on it that looked handmade, cream-colored with a pattern of flying geese. She would learn later that Patricia had made it. She unpacked her bag slowly, listening to the sounds of the house. A furnace ticking, wind coming around the eaves, Raymond's boots on the floor somewhere below. It was the quietest place she had ever been. She did not cry. She had done her crying in the 3 days before she left. She started the next morning. Raymond was already out in the fields when she came downstairs, so she made a pot of coffee and stood at the kitchen window, looking at the flat brown land and the sky above it. Wide and pale and enormous, in the way that skies only are when there's nothing to interrupt them. She found bread in the cupboard, eggs in the fridge, and made herself breakfast. Left a plate warming in the oven for whenever he came back. He came in at 8:30, stopped short when he saw the plate. You didn't have to, he said. I know. He sat down and ate. She poured him coffee. They didn't talk, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who are both waiting to find out what kind of situation this is going to turn out to be. The first week was like that. Careful, measured, neither of them crowding the space the other occupied. Mabel cleaned the rooms that needed cleaning, organized the kitchen, made meals that were left at the stove without commentary. Raymond ate them, left the dishes on the counter, said thank you with the consistency of a man following a rule he'd set for himself. At the end of the first week, she found a small envelope on the kitchen table when she came down in the morning. Inside was cash, more than she'd expected. She found him in the equipment shed, doing something to the underside of a tractor. This is too much, she said, holding out the envelope. He didn't look up. It's what was agreed. With Gordon, not with me. He slid out from under the tractor and looked at her then. His hands were greasy, and he wiped them on a rag and said, What would you consider fair? No one had asked her that in a very long time. The question caught her off guard in a way she hadn't anticipated. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Then keep it for now, he said. And when you know, tell me. She went back inside. She stood in the kitchen for a moment with the envelope in her hand. Then she put it in her drawer and went back to work. By the second week, she had settled into the shape of the days. Raymond kept to himself with impressive consistency. Up before her, out in the fields or the equipment shed, back in for meals, gone again. He asked for nothing she hadn't already offered. He made no reference to the arrangement, to Gordon, to what any of it meant. He read at night. She could see the light in the study window when she walked past in the hall. She started leaving books on the kitchen table, ones she'd found on the shelves in the sitting room, spines cracked, margins penciled. She didn't say anything about them. He didn't say anything either. But she noticed they moved, and the pencil marks in the margins began to include new handwriting alongside the old, Patricia's. She realized. The old handwriting was Patricia's. She almost asked him about it once. She stopped herself. Some things aren't hers to ask. The town of Mossfield was small enough that news moved faster than people. By the third week, Mabel had been to the hardware store twice, and the grocery store 3 times, and each time she had felt the particular quality of attention that small towns extend to newcomers who arrive under unusual circumstances. People who already know your name before you've told them. People who look at you a half-second too long. The woman at the post office, a broad-shouldered woman in her 60s named Colette Harkin, was the first to say it out loud. "You're the one Gordon Crosse placed with Raymond Aldcroft," she said, sliding a package across the counter. "I'm working for Mr. Aldcroft," Mabel said carefully. Colette Harkin had the particular of a woman who was choosing her next words. "Patricia was well liked in this town," she said finally. "That's all I'll say." Mabel took her package and left. But it was Diane Sutcliffe who made it truly unpleasant. Diane Sutcliffe was on the town council, and the church committee, and the board of the local library. And she had the energy of someone who has never once doubted that their opinions are public goods. She had been Patricia Aldcroft's friend, or so she told anyone who would listen. Though Raymond's expression whenever her name came up suggested a more complicated history. Mabel encountered her at the grocery store in the 4th week, in the cereal aisle, and Diane stopped her cart and looked Mabel up and down in a way that was absolutely not subtle. "You're the Crosse girl," she said. "I'm Mabel," she said. "I heard about the arrangement." Diane's voice had a particular emphasis on the word, the emphasis of someone who has discussed the arrangement at length, in detail, with several other people, and has settled on a firm opinion. "Raymond Aldcroft is a grieving man. I hope you know that." "I'm aware of his history," Mabel said. "He's not in a position to make good decisions about who he lets into his home." Mabel looked at her for a moment. She thought of 7 different things she could say. She settled on, "I appreciate your concern," and pushed her cart forward. Diane Sutcliffe was not accustomed to being moved past. She followed 2 steps down the aisle. "I'm only saying, women like you," Mabel stopped. She turned around. "Women like me," she said quietly, "are generally doing their best with what they've been given, same as anyone else." She held Diane's gaze for a moment. 1 beat, 2, and then she turned back around and continued shopping. Her hands were shaking slightly at the checkout. She didn't let herself think about it until she was back in the truck, and then she sat for a moment in the parking lot and breathed. She told herself it didn't matter. It mostly didn't, but mostly is a word with a lot of room in it. She didn't tell Raymond. There was no reason to. It wasn't his problem to carry. But Mossfield was small, and Diane Sutcliffe had a phone. And 2 days later, Raymond came in from the fields at noon. Unusual. He never came in at noon, and stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "I heard you ran into Diane Sutcliffe." Mabel was chopping onions. She didn't slow down. She had some things to say. She usually does. A pause. What did she say? "Nothing I haven't heard in some form or another." Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going into town this afternoon. There's a council meeting. Diane will be there." Mabel looked up. "Raymond, you don't need to." "I'm not going for you," he said, which wasn't entirely convincing, because he'd said it before she'd even finished the sentence. "I need to talk to them about the road access on the North Quarter anyway. It's convenient." She looked at him for a long moment. He was looking at the floor in the way he did when he'd said more than he'd planned to. "All right," she said. He nodded once and went back outside. She heard the truck leave at 2 o'clock. He was back by 4:30. She didn't ask what happened. He didn't volunteer it. But the next time she went into town, Diane Sutcliffe saw her coming from across the street and found somewhere else to be. It was late November when the pipes in the east wing froze for the first time. Mabel had been awake since 3 in the morning because the furnace was making a sound it hadn't made before. A low, intermittent knock, like something loose rattling around inside metal. She'd been lying in the dark trying to decide if it was worth waking Raymond when she heard him already moving down the hall. She opened her door. He was in the corridor with a flashlight and a general expression of someone who has dealt with this furnace before and not affectionately. "It's the east side pipes," he said. "Sometimes when it drops below -20 they..." He stopped. noticed her standing there in her socks and the old cardigan she slept in. "Sorry, I'll try to be quiet." "I was already awake," she said. "Is there something I can do?" "Space heater, in the closet. If you can get it running, that'll help." She found the space heater. He disappeared into the utility room. She could hear him moving around below the floor, which she hadn't known was possible. And then there was a series of sounds that suggested a brief and private struggle between a man and an old house. And then the knocking stopped. He came back upstairs. 40 minutes later, she had made tea. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the 2 mugs on the table, with the expression of a man recalibrating his expectation of the evening. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know," she said, which was by now their shorthand for something neither of them had fully named. He sat down. He drank the tea. Outside the kitchen window, the thermometer read -24, and the dark was absolute, and the only sound was the furnace, finally running smooth. "Patricia used to call that furnace Gerald," he said, out of nowhere. Mabel looked at him. "Because it had a personality," he said. "Mostly unpleasant. She said it was like having a difficult relative living in the basement." He looked at his mug. She named things. "She sounds like she was a good person," Mabel said. "She was the best person I knew." He said it simply, without performance, the way someone states a fact about geography. "I don't say that to be maudlin. I say it because it's true, and I don't see a reason not to say true things." They sat with that for a while. The furnace ran. The dark outside was very complete. "What happened with your parents?" he asked, not looking at her. "You don't have to say." She thought about deflecting. She didn't. She told him about the accident, about the ice, about being 19 and suddenly untethered, in a way she hadn't known a person could be. About Gordon's house, Gordon's generosity, Gordon's price. She kept it brief because she had learned that grief told too long becomes performance, and she didn't want to perform it. When she finished, Raymond was quiet for a moment. "Gordon Crosse is not a good man," he said. "No," she agreed. "I didn't know the arrangement involved." He stopped, seemed to choose his words carefully. "I thought it was more straightforward than it was. I should have asked more questions." "You didn't kidnap me," Mabel said. "I got in the car. That's not," he exhaled. "That's not how I want this to have started." "How things start," Mabel said, "doesn't always determine what they become." He looked at her then. It was the first time she felt that he was looking at her properly. Not as the person who made the meals or managed the house, but as the specific individual sitting across the table in the middle of the night while the thermometer fell outside. "No," he said, "I suppose it doesn't." December came hard, the way it does in northern Ontario, with a bluntness that leaves no room for argument. The fields went under snow, and Raymond shifted from fieldwork to maintenance, moving between the equipment shed and the barn with the particular purposefulness of someone who does not know how to be idle. Mabel had started helping with the books. She'd noticed they were 3 months behind in reconciliation, mentioned it carefully, and he'd said, "If you want to take a run at it," which was his way of asking. She set up a system at the kitchen table. He would come in, look over her shoulder at the spreadsheet, say nothing useful, and then wander away again. But he left her alone to do it, which was its own kind of trust. Patrice called from Ottawa on a Tuesday. "How is it?" she asked. "Are you safe? Do you need me to come get you?" "I'm safe," Mabel said, sitting by the sitting room window with the phone and a cup of coffee, watching snow fall on the back field. That's not a very full answer. "I know," she said. "Mabel, it's not what I expected," she said. "He's not what I expected." Patrice was quiet for a moment. In what direction? Mabel thought about Raymond, in the middle of the night, talking about Patricia naming the furnace Gerald. About him walking into a town council meeting on an afternoon he hadn't planned for. About the books annotated in 2 sets of handwriting now, Patricia's and his, and then slowly, carefully, the beginning of hers. "In a good direction," she said. "I think. I'm still figuring it out." It was Christmas Eve when things shifted in a way they couldn't shift back from. She had been to town for a few last things. cream, butter, a jar of the pickles Raymond put on everything because she'd noticed and ordered them specially. The roads were icy, and the drive back took twice as long as usual. When she got in, Raymond was in the kitchen, and something was on the stove that smelled like it had been there a long time. "You didn't have to cook," she said, surprised, unwinding her scarf. "I've been cooking my own meals for 6 years," he said, with the faint dignity of a man who knows the limits of his own cooking. "I haven't always been good at it, but I know how to manage a stew." She took off her coat and hung it up and came to look in the pot. It was a good stew, actually. Simple, proper, the kind of thing that means something on a cold night. "My mother made stew on Christmas Eve," she said. "She had a whole thing about it. Said Christmas Day was for the fuss and Christmas Eve was for the real food." "Mine too," Raymond said. He was standing at the counter with a glass of water, watching stove. "She called it getting ready food. Food you eat to be ready for everything else." Mabel laughed, a small, genuine sound that surprised her slightly. Raymond looked at her when she laughed. Not the recalibrating look, not the careful look. Just looked. The way you look at something that catches you unaware and you're not yet sure what to do about it. "You should laugh more," he said. "You're—" He stopped. "I'm what?" He looked back at the stove. "You don't have to dim yourself down in this house," he said. "Whatever you did before you got here, you don't have to do that here." She stood very still. She had not known until he said it that she had been doing it. The careful smallness, the deliberate quietness, the making herself easy to accommodate. 7 years of it in Gordon's house, and then 4 months of it here, out of habit, out of caution. "Old habit," she said. "I know," he said, which was the first time he'd used their shorthand back to her. They ate at the kitchen table. She lit 2 candles she found in the back of the pantry. The snow was coming down again outside, steady and unhurried, piling up on the windowsills and the fence posts, and the long flat roof of the equipment shed. Raymond told her about Christmas when Patricia was alive. Not in a sad way, the way people sometimes talk about the dead as if apologizing for them, but matter-of-factly, the way you describe a place you've been that shaped you. She told him about her parents, about her mother's stew, about the year her father got lost driving to church in a blizzard and ended up at someone else's family dinner by accident and stayed for 2 hours because the hosts wouldn't hear of anything else. Raymond laughed at that, a real laugh, low and sudden, and it changed his face entirely. "That sounds like the kind of story you'd tell for the rest of your life," he said. "We did," she said. "We told it every year." The candles burned down to stubs. The stew pot was empty. Outside, the snow kept coming, as if it had somewhere important to be. "I want to say something," Raymond said eventually. "All right," she said. "I've been alone for 6 years," he said, "and I'd made a kind of peace with that. I didn't expect to." He looked at his hands on the table. "I didn't expect that peace to become something smaller than what I wanted, is all. I'd stopped noticing that it had." Mabel was quiet. "I'm not saying that as any kind of pressure," he said. "You're free here. You've always been free here, I want that to be clear. I'm just saying it because I told you I'd say true things." She looked at him across the table, in the low light of the burned-down candles, in the quiet of a house that had started to feel like something she was a part of. "I think," she said slowly, "that the day I drove out here, I thought I was losing something. A future I'd planned for. A life that was going to look a certain way." She paused. "I'm starting to think maybe I was just taking a different road to something I didn't know how to name yet." Raymond was still. Then he said, "What kind of name do you think it might have?" "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'd like to find out." He nodded once, slowly. Outside, the snow was very white and the dark was very deep, and the house held the warmth of a fire and a stew, and 2 people talking the way they hadn't let themselves talk before. "Then we'll find out," he said. Spring came in March, tentatively, the way spring comes to northern Ontario. Unsure of itself, still losing ground some days, then suddenly and decisively tipping over into something that smelled like mud and possibility. The snow retreated from the fields in stages, revealing last year's stubble and the dark earth underneath. And Raymond began his fieldwork again. And the days stretched out and filled with light. Mabel drove to Sudbury to see Patrice, who came up from Ottawa for a long weekend. They sat in a coffee shop, and Patrice watched her across the table with the attentive look of someone taking inventory. "You look different," Patrice said. "Different how? Like you've been somewhere that agreed with you." Mabel thought about that. About the East Wing with the flying geese quilt. About -24 degrees and tea at 3 in the morning. About a man who said he would say true things and had, over and over, been true to that. "I think I have," she said. Gordon Crosse called once in February. She didn't answer. He called again. She picked up the second time, because avoidance felt like letting him continue to have something over her. "I just want to know you're all right," he said. "You're my niece." "I'm all right," she said. "And I'm your former arrangement, Gordon. That's what you called me. I'm choosing to take that at face value." He sputtered something. She let him. Then she said, "Don't call again," and hung up. She told Raymond about it that evening. He was at the kitchen table with the books. She'd taught him the spreadsheet system, mostly so she'd have someone else who understood it, and he looked up when she came in. She told him. He listened. "Good," he said. When she finished, "That's all?" "That's all," he said. "You handled it. You don't need me to add anything." She sat down across from him. "Most people would have something to say about it." "Most people," he said, "confuse having opinions with being useful." He looked back at the spreadsheet. "You're not 26 years old and nobody's arrangement. You know that." She did know it. She had been working at knowing it slowly, in the way that knowing something real is different from knowing it in your head. "I know," she said. He glanced up. There's shorthand again. He almost smiled. She liked that. The almost, the way it sat at the edge of his face like something patient waiting to be earned. By May, the fields were green and Raymond had put the new boards on the front porch. And Mabel had started to think about what she wanted the summer to look like, which was itself a new thing. The imagining forward, the permission to plan past the next few weeks. She was on the porch one afternoon with coffee, watching the county road when Raymond came from the barn and stopped at the foot of the porch steps and looked at her. "There's a position open," he said, "at the law office in town. Administrative. Bilingual preferred but not required. I saw the posting this morning." She looked at him. "You looked up job postings." "I was at the hardware store, and they had the bulletin board." A pause. "I thought you should know it was there." She studied him. He was looking at the middle distance the way he did when he'd done something he wasn't sure how to explain. "Raymond, you had a career before," he said, "a direction. I don't want you to." He stopped. "I want this to be a life you chose, not a situation you settled for." There it was, said plainly, the way he always said things. The care underneath the plain words, like the dark earth under the winter fields. You knew it was there because everything grew from it. "I'll look at the posting," she said. She did. She applied. She got the job. And she started in June, 3 days a week to begin, with the option to expand. Raymond drove her in the first morning and said nothing on the way. And when she got out of the truck, he said, "Have a good day," the way people say it when they mean more than the words. She did have a good day. She had a lot of good days. The law office was small and busy, and the people there were, on the whole, decent, and Colette at the post office had apparently decided that Mabel was all right, and made that known in the particular way of small towns, which meant that by August, Mabel was known simply as Raymond's Mabel, which she found she didn't mind as much as she might have expected, because it went the other way too. He was, in the quiet understanding of Mossfield, Mabel's Raymond. And there was a kind of symmetry in that which felt like something earned. She was in the kitchen, one evening in September, making the stew, her mother's version, which she had finally written down from memory, when she heard his boots on the porch and then the door, and then the specific quality of quiet that meant he was standing behind her, "Smells like your mother's Christmas Eve stew," he said. "It is," she said. "It's September." "I know." She heard him hang up his jacket. She heard him come to stand a few feet behind her. She kept stirring. "Mabel," he said, "I'd like to ask you something, and you are completely free to say no, or not yet, or however you need to answer it." She set the spoon on the rest and turned around. He was standing in the kitchen, in his barn jacket, with his hat in his hands, turning it the way. He turned things when he was thinking, and his face had the particular seriousness of a man who has run through this conversation many times and is still not certain of the ground. "All right," she said. "I'm not a man who's good at this," he said. "I'm better at fixing things and being quiet and showing up. I know that. But I want to show up for you, specifically, for as long as you'll let me. And I want that to be something clear, something that has a name." She looked at him. He looked back. "Yes," she said. "I think it's time it had a name." Outside, the September evening was the color of copper and old hay, and the fields were gold and the sky above them was going slowly purple at the edges the way September skies in northern Ontario will, beautiful and unhurried, as if they have all the time in the world to become what they're becoming. She had driven up that gravel lane 11 months ago with one bag, and no clear idea of what came next. She had arrived in a situation not of her choosing, in a house still carrying the quiet of a grief that wasn't hers, in a town that had already formed its opinions, and somewhere in the turning of it, in the 3 a.m. tea and the frozen pipes and the books with 2 sets of handwriting, and the stew on Christmas Eve, she had stopped being an arrangement and had simply become herself, in a house that had made room for her, with a man who said true things and meant them. Raymond put his hat on the counter and reached out his hand, and she took it. And the stew simmered on the stove, and outside the copper evening went slowly and beautifully into dark.